Welcome to Great Automotive Lives. I'm your host, Andrew, the classic car guy. I'm a motoring writer, photographer, and now, inexplicably, in the chilly autumn of my career, a Johnny-come-lately podcaster. This podcast aims to bring to life the stories, histories, intrigue and drama surrounding some of the automotive world's most interesting characters. Some may be well known, others less so, but I hope you will find all, in some small way, warrant you investing a little of your listening time hearing about lives remarkably lived. If nothing else, I hope something you hear today prompts further reading, listening or watching. We are of course privileged, after all, to live in a world today where the ability to drink in fascinating facts and information is limited only by one's thirst for knowledge. All that said, shall we crack on?
Why the Life of Donald Healey.
The automotive world is and has always been populated by a myriad of skilled practitioners. Defined and delineated roles include designers, engineers, stylists, salespeople, marketing specialists and the like. The history of the industry, especially in the UK, is peppered with high-flying automotive executives, some well-known, some not. Some successful, and some downright disastrous. Occasionally a polymath rises to the surface like the cream in a bottle of milk and seems to transcend pigeonholing and generally defy the banality of the job title or role description. One such individual is surely Donald Healey. If the automotive industry has impresarios, then Donald Healey would be their totem. Unlike my previous inaugural subject, Charles Rolls, Healey enjoyed a long life, living to almost 90 years old and having his influential hand in dozens and dozens of different models and several quite diverse marques. Much like Rolls, flying and racing were in Healey's blood too. Perhaps, unlike Rolls, through no fault of his own of course, Healey's sphere of influence was significantly more fundamentally consequential on both sides of the Atlantic. A great automotive life? You bet your sweet patootie it is, as our transatlantic cousins may say.
The Life of Donald Healey.
Donald Mitchell Healey, or DMH, as he became widely known, must have wished he was back in the cosy confines of Cornwall's Perranporth as he approached Doncaster Racecourse. During World War I, the racecourse had been hurriedly pressed into service as the temporary headquarters of the Royal Flying Corps. Healey had attained his wings at the Corps, but as happens in wartime, following a mere 3 hours of hands-on flight training. As the engine of his French-built Morris Farman biplane started to cough and splutter, Healey must have felt totally unprepared for what would quickly unfold. As the power fell away, the biplane spiraled into a stall and veered into one of the course's grandstands. This cacophonous collision must have come as a rude awakening to the hundreds of infantrymen who were billeted within the stands and were using the hard wooden benches as makeshift beds. Miraculously, no one was killed. Healey was quickly retrieved from the wreckage, soaked in aviation spirit, but otherwise unharmed. By another amazing stroke of luck, the wreckage failed to ignite, which would have proved disastrous for Healey and all those around him. Healey might have thought his air crash experiences were behind him. If he did, he was sadly mistaken. Following his Doncaster disaster, Healey was posted to a squadron who were using Royal Aircraft Factory BE-2Es, equipped with rockets to hunt and kill German Zeppelins. In short order, however, he was dispatched to France to pilot FB-2B night bombers. In one of the first night bombing raids of the First World War, Healey's plane was involved in a friendly fire incident when an Allied shell exploded perilously close to it. The resulting damage forced Healey to ditch the aircraft close to enemy lines. His tremendous luck continued to hold when he was rescued, but he had suffered temporary memory loss and was confined to a psychiatric hospital to recuperate. When he did recover, the powers that be deemed he was no longer fit to fly, and his combat flying career and associated crashing was at an end. Healey was born in the quaint fishing village of Perranporth in Cornwall. He was the eldest son of Frederick and Emma Healey, who ran the Red House General Stores in the village. Young Donald exhibited a fascination for all things mechanical, especially aircraft. No surprise then that he went on to study engineering at Newquay College. On leaving Newquay, Healey would take up an apprenticeship in the tool room of the Sopwith Aviation Company in far-off Kingston-upon-Thames. Within the year he had transferred to Brooklands, where Sopwith and other manufacturers built and tested their aircraft. Healey was to work on the Sopwith Pup, Scout and Camel, as well as an interrupter mechanism that allowed a machine gun to be fired through a spinning propeller, without really disappointing consequences. In 1916, and before completing his apprenticeship, Healey volunteered for the Royal Flying Corps, initially as an air mechanic. The Corps was short of pilots, however, and Healey would soon be co-opted for flight duties, gaining his wings in June of 1916. Following his aforementioned series of unfortunate aviation events, Healey would spend the last years of the war inspecting aircraft parts for the Air Ministry. By 1919, Healey was back in Perranporth and taking a correspondence course in automotive engineering. Despite there only being 3 cars in the immediate vicinity at the time, Healey saw fit to open a garage in the stores building of his father's shop and named it, surprisingly, the Red House Garage. In order to supplement the slim pickings to be had from the local car owners, all 3 of them, he also established a car and coach hire business, a taxi firm, and the Paraphone, do you see what he did there? Radio company, making crystal radio sets. Other related money spinners included using his Sopwith toolroom skills to fabricate hard-to-come-by spare parts, chauffeur-driven sightseeing tours for holidaymakers, and becoming Cornwall's sole agent for aerial cars. Yes, unbelievably, an early forerunner to the company that today makes the bonkers Atom and Nomad. This diversified business strategy worked well for Healey, and by 1923 it was delivering well enough to allow him to scratch another persistent itch. Healey co-founded, and possibly confounded, the Truro Motor Club at around that time, and used a Buick gifted by his father John to compete in local races and trials. In one such speed trial, he piloted the Buick to an impressive 66 miles an hour. Perpetually with one eye on business, Healey entered an Aerial 10 into the 1924 RAC Land's End to John O'Groats and back reliability trial. The plan was to promote aerial cars, which would ultimately and hopefully benefit his sales of the cars back at the Red House Garage. The Aerial 10 was the deluxe model, weighing in at a chunky 235 pounds and offering refinements like a mirror, a speedometer, these were simpler times of course, and plush leather upholstery, an electric starter motor, the utter height of motoring decadence, could be had for an extra £2. The Aerial covered 1,788 miles, gave an impressive 53.79 miles per gallon, and a whopping 6,433 miles per gallon of oil, and used only 5 pints of water. There were no breakages or component failures. Inevitably, of course, Healey yearned for better, faster and more competitive racing, so he bought a Red Wing from the Riley brothers. Sadly, the Riley caught fire, but Healey continued to race and rally at the wheel of MGs and Triumphs. In fact, it was an 832cc Triumph Super 7 that Healey would pilot in his first international rally in 1929, the famous Monte Carlo. This also marked remarkably the first time he had driven outside the UK. Unusually severe weather conditions plagued the rally, and like many of his competitors, Healey did not finish. He returned in 1930 in the same car, however, and this time he came 7th. His exploits were getting him noticed, and in 1931 he secured a works drive in a 4.5-litre Invicta S-Type. Despite the S-Type losing an argument with a telegraph pole in Sweden that displaced the rear axle by over 3 inches, Healey won the rally and bagged a £400 purse to boot. The following year, he secured a second place in the rally, once again for Invicta. All this high-profile success led to Healey's stock rising considerably. In 1933, he was offered a position with Riley, and he sold the garage and relocated his family, by then wife Ivy, with whom he would have 3 sons, to the Midlands. With Healey now on the doorstep, it wasn't long before Triumph came a-calling, and Healey joined the Coventry firm late in 1933. Triumph was developing a new sports model and wanted Healey's input, initially making him experimental manager. As part of the process, Healey acquired an Alfa Romeo 8C and dismantled it to study the factors that made it so damn good. He even travelled to Milan to meet Alfa Romeo's chief engineer, where surprisingly he was warmly received. This mystery Triumph was unveiled in 1934 as the Dolomite Straight 8. It was a remarkable coincidence, obviously, that the Dolomite looked strikingly like the Alfa Romeo 8C. The Dolomite was a highly specified number boasting a 1990cc straight 8 engine fitted with a Roots-type supercharger and delivering around 140 brake horsepower. This prodigious output had propelled it to over 110 miles an hour during testing at Brooklands. Healey campaigned a prototype Dolomite in the 1935 Monte Carlo Rally. Healey campaigned a prototype Dolomite in the 1935 Monte Carlo Rally. This time he skillfully avoided a myriad of telegraph poles, only to get collected up by a speeding freight train at a Danish level crossing. Healey was exhibiting the classic alpha male driving technique of being ever so slightly optimistic about speeds and distances. Seeing the train approaching the crossing from a distance, Healey knew he could beat it there. Right up until the point that he didn't beat it there, instead choosing to arrive at the crossing at the exact same time as the speeding train. The train demolished the long nose of the Dolomite, and its mighty iron wheels skimmed past Healey's legs. This episode represents what is technically known in motoring circles as a code brown. Undeterred, of course, Healey had the Dolomite rebuilt and returned the following year to finish 8th. Sadly, the Dolomite Straight 8 fared not much better on the home front either, with a retail price of 1,000 guineas, with an entry-level Ford at the time being about 100 quid. The Dolomite Straight 8 never made production, with just 3 cars and 6 engines known to have been built. Despite this false dawn, Healey stayed at Triumph until the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, when the company promptly went into liquidation. He stayed on at the factory thereafter, however, in the role of works manager for H.M. Hobson, who were manufacturing carburetors for aero engines for the Ministry of Supply. Towards the end of the war, he moved to Humber to work on the fighting vehicle side. At Humber, Healey met Ben Bowden, chief body draftsman, and Achille Sammy Sampietero, and they daydreamed together about building sports cars after the war. This idea would prove to be Healey's next nagging and scratch-worthy itch, and one with worldwide impact. Whilst Healey left Humber at the war's end, Bowden and Sampietero stayed on. Without a day job getting in the way, Healey was able to quickly secure premises for their new venture. They rented surplus space at Benford's Limited Cement Mixers in Cape Road, Warwick. The early days were an all-hands-on-deck affair. Bowden and Sampietero attended at the weekends, and they used cement mixer tools to help build the new prototype chassis. They got help from Healey's eldest son, Jeff, when he was on leave from the army, and even had tracings drawn by the Women's Auxiliary Air Force personnel stationed nearby. As the operation grew, Healey secured additional space on the Benford site in the form of an old aircraft hangar. The Donald Healey Motor Company was formed by Healey, Bowden and Sampietero in February 1946 with a capital of £50,000. Option holders included James Watt, who Healey had met at Triumph, who would go on to become their sales director. The new car's body production was initiated by Riley, but Riley had been swallowed up by the Morris Group, and priorities for them had changed, or at least been changed. An alternative supplier was urgently sought, with the Westland Engineering Company of Hereford stepping into the fray. This car became the Healey Westland Roadster and was unveiled to the press in January 1946. Meanwhile, work on a saloon version was underway, with the body production outsourced to Elliott's of Reading. Unsurprisingly, the saloon would become known as the Healey Elliott. These two models were in production between October 1946 and October 1950. This was very much a cottage industry, however, with only 64 Westlands and 101 Elliots being built during this period. The Healey Silverstone joined the range in 1949, with the British government doubling the tax rate on cars costing over £1,000 in 1948, from 33 to 66%. Healey saw a niche for sub-£1,000 sports cars. The Silverstone was designed as a dual-purpose road and track vehicle, coming in at a tax-busting £975. Again, and despite this, just 105 Silverstones were built, with production ending in 1950. As you might have guessed, considering Healey's competition background, all three cars were driven to victory in major races and rallies by Donald Healey and other top international drivers of the time. Campaigns were fought in demanding rallies such as the Mille Miglia, Le Mans, and the Monte Carlo and Alpine rallies. So Healey was now well and truly in the car business, but he soon learned what an expensive and unforgiving business it was. By the end of the 1940s, the company had racked up debts of around £50,000, which is roughly £2.25 million in today's money. What he needed was an amazing and quite unlikely stroke of luck. Being Donald Healey, of course, that's exactly what he got. In December 1949, Healey boarded the RMS Queen Elizabeth ocean liner, operated by Cunard, which plied a weekly transatlantic route. Healey was off to visit Ed Cole of General Motors to see if he could persuade them to sell him Cadillac's new 331 cubic inch V8 engine and their associated powertrains for use in his Silverstone Club racer. During the crossing, Healey encountered a tall, heavily set American businessman by the name of George Mason. Mason was using an elaborate stereographic camera system which intrigued Healey no end. Healey's warm-natured, ebullient Cornish personality and mutual love of photography endeared him to Mason, and they got chatting. In the bar, where else? It turned out that George was none other than the president of the Nash Kelvinator Corporation, American car and refrigerator conglomerate. Healey explained the purpose of his journey, but George, an industry insider, was skeptical about Healey's chances of success. He left Healey with an open invitation to give him a call if his GM meeting went south, probably knowing full well that it almost certainly would. It did, so he did, and this led to an agreement whereby Nash would supply Healey with 3.8-litre V8 engines, gearboxes and final drive units for use in a Healey-built and chassied sports car to be known as the Nash Healey. Destined only for sale in America, the cars were initially built by Panelcraft in Coventry, but later Pininfarina in Italy would be engaged to construct a restyled body and fit it to the rolling chassis before the completed car was shipped back to America. Not the most economical or efficient of supply chains, methinks. The Nash Healey wasn't an astounding success, with a total of 506 built between 1951 and 1954. The costs associated with the painfully protracted supply chain really did for the Nash Healey. In 1954, the Nash Healey cost around $6,000, with its main competitors, the Chevrolet Corvette and the Ford Thunderbird, costing around $3,500 and $3,000 respectively. Ouch. It was still a watershed arrangement for Healey, however. As part of the deal, Nash paid off Healey's debts to be repaid in the form of completed cars. Healey would later recount that it was one of the major stepping stones in my life and probably the greatest and most far-fetching of them all. Lucky Don strikes again. Healey's fairly regular stateside trips left him realizing there was a tangible but compact sports car-shaped gap in the US market. Something offering a price and performance between the MGTD and the Jaguar XK120 was bound to prosper, Healey felt. By the end of 1951, Healey, his son Jeff, an experimental engineer and friend, Roger Menadue, had begun to work on a new Healey. The car was intended to be a first reasonably priced sports car to offer 100 miles an hour performance with the lucrative North American market firmly in its crosshairs. Jeff Healey and Barry Bilby designed the chassis of the new car, and Jerry Coker, who joined Healey from Roots in 1950, did the body design and styling. Many accounts available have you believing that BMC chairman Leonard Lord knew nothing of Healey's new car until it was unveiled at Earl's Court in 1952. That's clearly a load of old cobblers. It's a matter of record that Healey had Lord's blessing to use the many surplus engines and drivetrains from the Austin A90 Atlantic as the basis for his new sports car. Lord probably bit Healey's arm off, in fact, as the A90 Atlantic is lasting proof that sticking Atlantic on something doesn't mean it will sell across the Atlantic. Some might unkindly say it was better suited to being parked in the Atlantic. The A90 Atlantic was an absolute lemon, but the 2.6-litre four-cylinder engine was actually the best part of this particular white elephant. Healey was less enamoured, however, with the A90's gearbox. First gear was ridiculously low, so Healey pragmatically blanked it off. I mean physically blanked off the gate with a piece of steel. He also added an overdrive acting on third and fourth gears, effectively creating a decent 5-speed box. Healey had tested the car on the notorious Jebek highway in Belgium, regularly reaching well over 100 miles an hour. As a result, the name Healey 100 was settled upon in tribute to its essentially conservatively attainable top speed. Tickford coach builders were commissioned to create a one-off body for the 1950 Earls Court Motor Show, and the diminutive sports car was entered at the last minute. Fable had it that Healey disliked the front end of the car, so made sure it was nosed into a pillar, preventing people from seeing it or photographing it head-on. No one else seemed to care, and the Healey 100 was a standout attraction of the show. Healey himself would say that from the moment the show opened it was a sensation. We didn't know how to keep people away from it. Healey secured over 3,000 orders before the show was even finished. With Healey's existing Warwickshire setup, however, an output of a couple of hundred cars a year would be a significant challenge. Up steps the dour, all-seeing Leonard Lord, then chairman of BMC, the British Motor Corporation. A contemporary account of Lord is as follows. Often to be seen walking around the factories, his attire dishevelled, his hawk-like face scowling, his manner combative, a hat usually leaning towards the back of his head, and always smoking a cigarette. Lord was fully aware of the stir that the Austin-powered 100 was making, and so saw an opportunity in the making. During the show, Lord offered Healey a deal over a no doubt smoky dinner. Austin would buy the rights to the Healey 100. The car would be rebadged as an Austin Healey, and the Donald Healey Motor Company would be engaged as consultants on a 20-year contract. Healey would remain free to develop new designs and special projects such as race competitive versions of production cars. A deal was struck, and the next day the Healey 100 was rebadged as the Austin Healey 100. The 100's body was built by Jensen in West Bromwich, and the cars produced at Austin's sprawling Longbridge plant. Over 74,000 would ultimately roll out of the Birmingham factory, with 80% being sold to overseas markets, positively and permanently rocketing the Healey name into the motoring firmament. Other Austin Healeys would follow, of course, most notably the 3000 and the diminutive Sprite. In some ways, however, the corporate behemoth that was BMC somehow subsumed some of the plucky privateer magic that set the early Healeys apart. The remarkable Austin Healey success story came to an end in the late 60s. Soon after the formation of the British Leyland Motor Corporation, another dour and grey-suited chairman, Lord Stokes, decided to kill off the names Healey, MG and Cooper to give sports car priority to his beloved Triumph marque. Healey was summoned to Stokes's office at the Standard Works in Coventry in 1967 to be told that British Leyland no longer needed his help in producing sports cars. Stokes added, "I don't think there is any value in names." Certainly not in his, some might say. Following the conclusion of his British Leyland contract, Healey joined Jensen as chairman in 1971. In fact, a quite unpronounceable contact called Shell Cuvale, who imported British and other cars to the United States, suggested that a replacement for the Austin Healey 3000 should and could be designed at Warwick. Part of his cunning plan was to buy Jensen in order to produce it. True to his word, Cuvale became a major shareholder in Jensen and made Healey chairman. Early Jensen Healey styling was by Hugo Poole, but Lagonda designer Bill Towns then penned a new look to cope with restrictions imposed by American crash regulations. The originally proposed Vauxhall engine was deemed too anemic and was ultimately replaced by the 1973cc Lotus 907 dual overhead cam 16-valve all-alloy engine. And breathe. Sadly, facing the numerous travails of the mid-1970s oil crisis, combined with component shortages and rampant inflation, it was all just too much for Jensen. The company closed its doors in May 1976. A total of just over 10,000 Jensen Healeys were built and sold, with around 70% of those going to America. Healey's heart, of course, always belonged to Cornwall. In 1961, Healey had bought the 27-acre Trebar estate near Falmouth in Cornwall. He made this his permanent home in 1963, partly due to his wife Ivy's failing health. Healey formed Trebar Gardens Limited to produce flowers for markets, as well as pursuing many other varied interests, including closed-circuit television, organ building, improving TV speakers, a digital 24-hour clock that projected the time onto the ceiling via mirrors, boating and fishing. After 10 years at Trebar, Healey and Ivy downsized to a home called Beggar's Roost near Truro. Here Healey pursued a new passion, generating power with windmills. Ivy's health sadly continued to deteriorate, and so a bungalow near son Bick and his wife Mary was bought for her and Donald. Sadly, Ivy passed away in 1980. But Donald would live for another 8 years in an annex to youngest son John's house. Donald Healey passed away in January 1988, just a few months short of his 90th birthday, and bizarrely on the very same day that his former Coat and End premises in Warwick were finally demolished.
Summing up Donald Healey.
I'm just 2 episodes into my podcast journey and I already feel like a hopeless, flaky failure, which of course I am. It's starting to look like famous and accomplished automotive icons are that for a reason. In Donald Healey's case, much like Charles Rolls from the first episode, he packed so much in and was seemingly incredibly restless, active and productive. It brings to mind that famous truism made by a famous golfist person. Was it Gary Player or his chain-smoking brother John Player? The more I practice, the luckier I get. Work rate definitely seems to play a part. Donald seemed to have a couple of other aces in his pack too, however. By all accounts, he had a warm and engaging personality, with a flashing smile and boundless enthusiasm for subjects that interested him and feats he wanted to achieve. He knew what he wanted and he had the soft skills required to rally, see what I did, others to his cause. All very helpful. Beyond that, he seemed to enjoy the luck of the Cornish too. There's an argument to be made, of course, that one makes one's own luck through positivity and open-mindedness, and some must surely come with that Herculean work rate. That may be true, but Donald also seemed to enjoy a fair chunk of the other stuff. Pure blind luck. Whatever the magic formula is, it was a heady brew, with Donald going from a shopkeeper's son from a sleepy Cornwall village to one of the best known and most celebrated automotive icons of the last 100 years. Great work, Donald. Great work.
In the Footsteps of Donald Healey.
It's sometimes nice for the committed autophile to find an excuse for a road trip or two, and what better way to stretch the legs of your Silverstone 100, Sprite, Jensen Healey, or in my case 2008 Renault Twingo GT Mark II, than to walk in the metaphorical footsteps of the great man. Healey was born, brought up and post-war returned to Woodbine Cottage in Perranporth. It was his parents' home and remains standing today. Luckily for the Healey enthusiasts, some moderate Google bashing seems to reveal it as a holiday cottage in 2025, replete with a rather nice website. Interestingly, no mention seems to be made of the Healey connection, however, which seems a shame. It looks very nice, and in great news for Dougie and Doris, 2 dogs can stay at no extra charge. As another uncharacteristic personal aside, my maternal grandparents lived in a Woodbine cottage when I was about 7 or 8. Not this one, I must stress. I remember often wondering why they had named their quaint cottage after a particularly potent brand of cigarettes at the time. Ultimately, I just put it down to the fact that Grandad was an enthusiastic smoker and thought no more of it, until now. Apparently, and surprisingly, Woodbine is a rather nice variety of honeysuckle, and probably was long before its name was co-opted by the makers of foul-smelling, death-toting, smouldering paper tubes of evil. Today, the Red House, the Healy's family general store, is occupied by Perranporth's Co-op. The area next to the Red House, where Healy's garage stood, was redeveloped in 2022 into 3 further retail units. If you find yourself in Perranporth, then be sure to visit the Church of St. Michael. In the east chancel you won't fail to be struck by a commemorative stained glass window dating from the year 2000. This colourful 3-light window depicts St. Piran with Cornish miners and a fisherman on Perranporth Beach with a Celtic cross in the sky. In the foreground, the flags of the UK, USA and Canada surround a blue and white Austin Healey 3000. The inscription reads, "In the memory of Donald Mitchell Healey CBE, 1898 to 1988, aviator, motor engineer, Cornishman, presented by the Austin Healey Club of America." A short drive to the village of Perranzabulo will be required to find Healey's grave in the churchyard of the parish church of St. Piran, the same saint who's frolicking on the beach with the miner and the fisherman. A 20-mile drive almost directly south from Perranporth will bring you to Trebar Gardens, Healey's bucolic home and retreat for around 10 years from the start of the 1960s. Owned and run today by a charitable trust, the gardens are open to the public, welcoming over 100,000 visitors a year from across the globe. At Trebar you will find a memorial sculpture dedicated to Healey, together with a plaque reading as follows. This sculpture in Cornish serpentine was commissioned by the Austin Healey Club of Great Britain to commemorate the life of Donald M. Healey, CBE, the rally and racing driver and designer of the sports cars bearing his name. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Warwick, Healey's original Cape Works today is fittingly the home of J.M.E. Healey's. It's an appropriate turn of fortune to find the building that witnessed the birth of the Healey mark still bristling with Healey's today. The Cape Works were bought by John Everard in 2008, and the company today is dedicated to the maintenance and restoration of Healey's of all iterations. Both John and his father before him are alumni of the Donald Healey Motor Company. In the accompanying show notes you might possibly find links to these Healey-related tributes to assist you with your road trip planning. Happy motoring!
I truly hope you found today's great automotive life interesting, inspiring, or at the very least a useful jumping off point for your own onward journey of discovery. Much like an underinvested and dysfunctional mass transportation system, I'm reasonably likely to amble along again at some undefined point in the near, medium or far future to invite you to join me on another automotive tangent of discovery. Inevitably, and for the sake of brevity, the fascinating details of this great automotive life have been significantly distilled, and so preemptive apologies are offered for glaring omissions, of which there are probably many. Your input and feedback is welcome, of course, on the understanding that I'm pathetically thin-skinned, so go easy with me. A contact email address is trepidatiously provided in the accompanying show notes. Until then, please tell many others if you enjoyed this podcast, and even perhaps leave the 21st century's equivalent of a thumbs up at the Colosseum in the form of a warm and fluffy review. It not only helps me avoid becoming moodier and more irascible, but also helps others find the podcast and generally makes the world a tiny bit nicer for a vanishingly small number of people. If you hated it, tell no one. Until next time, dear listener,